The studio lights burned bright enough to erase every shadow on the stage. Cameras glided quietly over polished floors, catching every shimmer of glass and every nervous movement. It looked like another routine live broadcast, but something about the air felt different, charged and heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Producers whispered in the dark corners while the red on-air sign began to glow. In the center chair sat Evelyn Carter, calm and confident, her smile smooth and practiced. She had been raised in the spotlight, daughter of a former president, and face of a famous charity known as the Carter Trust. Her team had prepared every line and every gesture. She believed tonight would be simple, a friendly talk about generosity and leadership. Across the stage waited an empty chair, the one reserved for Representative Renee Brooks. People knew Renee for her steady voice and sharp mind. She was fearless, respected, and often the one who asked questions powerful people wished to avoid. Some called her a troublemaker. Others saw her as the voice of honesty. Either way, her presence guaranteed that tonight's broadcast would draw millions of eyes. Marcus Lane, the veteran host, read his note cards one last time. His voice was warm, but his palms were damp. 30 years in television had taught him when a show carried tension before the first word was spoken, and this one did. The floor manager raised 3 fingers, 3, 2, 1, and the music began. The crowd applauded. Marcus smiled into the camera. Good evening, America, and welcome to Voices of America Live. Tonight, we're talking about truth, transparency, and the leaders who shape our future. The camera panned across the cheerful audience before settling on Evelyn Carter, who nodded politely, crossing her legs with effortless grace. Joining us tonight, Marcus continued, is Representative Renee Brooks. The applause grew as Renee walked in. She didn't wave. She didn't rush. She simply entered with quiet confidence and sat down. Evelyn kept her pleasant smile, but she felt a small shift inside her chest. The air thickened. Marcus turned to his guests. Let's begin with you, Ms. Carter. Your foundation has become one of the largest private charities in the country. How do you maintain public trust when so much depends on transparency? Evelyn straightened. That's a wonderful question, Marcus. Transparency has always been at the heart of what we do. Every dollar is tracked and used to empower communities. We believe in openness and trust. Her tone was warm and steady, and the audience nodded along. But Renee didn't move. She listened quietly, her fingers loosely clasped. When Marcus invited her to speak, she smiled faintly. Transparency, she said, it was more than a slogan. It's a promise. And promises mean nothing without proof. A light stir ran through the crowd. Marcus gave a careful laugh. Exactly what we're here to discuss. Truth and leadership. Evelyn nodded again, comforted by his quick save. But Renee's simple statement lingered in the room like a faint vibration. Viewers at home leaned a little closer without realizing why. From the control booth, a producer whispered, "Don't cut." "This is good," the director nodded. On stage, Evelyn regained her rhythm. "When people see our work," she said, "they see results. Schools built, wells dug, lives changed. That's what transparency looks like." Applause followed, but Renee only tilted her head slightly, as if filing the words away for later. Marcus glanced toward the camera. "We'll take a short break, and when we return, we'll dive deeper into how truth defines leadership." Music swelled, lights dimmed, and the screen faded to commercial. Evelyn exhaled slowly. The polite part of the evening was over. Somewhere behind those studio lights, something unseen had just begun to move. When the show returned from the break, the lights seemed brighter, sharper, almost too white. The audience clapped again, unaware that the mood on stage had already changed. Marcus smiled for the camera, his voice cheerful. "Welcome back to Voices of America Live." Before the break, Ms. Carter spoke about the importance of transparency in modern charity work. Now, Representative Brooks, you've pushed for stricter oversight on nonprofits. Tell us why. Renee leaned forward slightly, her hands folded neatly on the desk. Her tone was calm, almost gentle. "Because trust is easy to ask for and hard to earn," she said. "People donate because they believe in good intentions. But good intentions should never replace good records." The audience went quiet. Marcus cleared his throat, trying to keep the mood light. That's a fair point, of course. Ms. Carter, your thoughts? Evelyn nodded, still smiling. I agree completely. That's why our reports are public and our books are open. We have nothing to hide. Her voice was smooth, but inside she felt a small tug of unease. Renee's words didn't sound like an argument. They sounded like the start of something deeper. Marcus continued, asking about leadership, responsibility, and family legacy. Evelyn spoke easily, her answers polished, while Renee responded with short, thoughtful remarks that seemed to carry hidden weight. The cameras caught every glance between them. At home, viewers noticed the way Evelyn's smile sometimes froze for half a second before returning. They noticed the way Renee's calm stare never wavered. The air in the studio thickened, a silence beneath the noise. Marcus shifted in his chair, his fingers brushing the next card in the stack. He sensed the invisible current passing between the two women and decided to follow it. Representative Brooks, he said carefully, you've often said that honesty and leadership can't exist without accountability. What do you think accountability looks like in practice? Renee answered slowly, her voice steady. It looks like facing questions even when they're uncomfortable. It looks like saying, I don't know, when you really don't. And it looks like showing people the truth before they have to go searching for it. The words landed softly but carried weight. The audience murmured in approval. Evelyn forced another small smile. And that's exactly what we do, she said quickly. We publish everything and we welcome review. Renee gave a polite nod, but her eyes stayed fixed on Evelyn's. The host smiled again, but his nervous laugh sounded thinner now. That's the spirit, he said, turning to another question, this one about global partnerships. Evelyn began talking about community programs abroad, but for the first time, her voice trembled slightly at the edges. She caught herself, paused, and smoothed her tone, pretending it was just a moment of fatigue. But the cameras captured it. The director whispered into the headset, "Stay close on her face. The audience will feel that crack." The segment rolled on. Renee listened, saying nothing, her stillness louder than words. The audience leaned in, drawn by something they couldn't name. Evelyn kept speaking, listing numbers, projects, and partners, but her rhythm was gone. Every sentence felt like walking across thin ice. When she finally stopped, the studio was silent for a heartbeat too long. Marcus clapped softly, forcing the audience to follow. "Impressive work," he said. "Representative Brooks, any final thoughts before our next break?" Renee hesitated, then smiled faintly. Only that transparency sounds easy until someone asks to see the receipts. The crowd reacted with a mix of laughter and curiosity. Marcus chuckled nervously, glancing at the control room for the cue. "And on that note," he said, "we'll pause again. Don't go anywhere. You won't want to miss what comes next." The theme music rose, but the tension stayed. Evelyn exhaled, her heartbeat loud in her chest. Renee turned slightly toward her and said quietly, "Relax, Miss Carter. It's just a conversation." Evelyn smiled without showing her teeth. "Of course," she replied, though she could feel the sweat gathering at the back of her neck. The cameras cut to commercial again, but the studio itself felt like it was still rolling. Crew members avoided eye contact. The sound technician whispered, "Did you feel that? It's like something's about to break." The producer nodded. "Keep everything rolling. Don't miss a second." Back on stage, Evelyn sipped her water and checked her notes, though the words blurred before her eyes. For the first time in her career, she wasn't sure how the next part of the show would go. Across from her, Renee rested her hands calmly on the table, her posture unchanging, her focus steady. Marcus leaned between them with a practiced smile. "You're both doing great," he said quietly. But his eyes betrayed his nerves. He had hosted interviews with presidents, CEOs, and movie stars, but he had never felt a silence this heavy between two guests. The clock above the camera ticked toward the next segment. The studio assistant counted down again. 5, 4, 3, 2. Evelyn straightened, pulled her shoulders back, and forced a calm breath. She reminded herself that she'd been trained for this. She could handle any question, any surprise. She always did. When the lights flashed on again, the room looked different. Maybe it was the brightness, or maybe it was what hung in the air. Expectation. Marcus's voice echoed smoothly. Welcome back to Voices of America Live. We're here with Evelyn Carter and Representative Renee Brooks, discussing truth and transparency in leadership. Ms. Carter, before the break you mentioned your international partnerships. Could you tell us more about how your foundation manages those operations? Evelyn smiled, thankful for the easy question. Of course, Marcus. We work with local organizations to ensure every dollar makes a difference. It's something I'm very proud of. Her tone was steady again, her confidence rebuilding. But halfway through her sentence, Renee's hand moved slightly, turning a single page of her notepad. The soft sound of paper sliding across the table reached Evelyn's ears, and it rattled her more than she expected. She stumbled for half a second, her words catching. She recovered quickly, but the moment didn't go unnoticed. The camera operator zoomed in. The viewers saw it, the flicker of hesitation, the glimpse of doubt. Marcus, sensing the shift, steered toward Renee. Representative Brooks, you've also visited several of the same regions. How important do you think accountability is in global aid? Renee leaned toward the microphone. It's everything, she said simply. Money meant to help people should never get lost between intention and impact. Her tone was gentle, but her words landed with quiet precision. Evelyn looked at her, trying to read her expression. For a split second their eyes met, and the audience could feel it. A silent exchange, a spark of challenge. Marcus smiled again, wrapping up the segment. We'll be right back after this message, he said brightly. The lights dimmed, and music filled the air once more. But this time, nobody in the studio moved. Evelyn turned slightly toward Renee. You came here with an agenda, didn't you? She said under her breath. Renee didn't look at her. I came here with facts, she replied softly. Evelyn's smile froze again. The stage manager called out for one more segment. The final part of the evening would begin in less than a minute. The control room buzzed. Keep every camera hot, the director ordered. Something's coming. I can feel it. And on the stage, Evelyn could feel it too. A pressure she couldn't explain. A story she didn't want told. As the lights brightened for the last time, Marcus raised his cue card and said, And we're back. Evelyn drew in a slow breath, her heart pounding. Renee's calm eyes met hers. The audience leaned forward. The story was no longer about charity. It was about truth, and truth was getting ready to speak. The applause faded as the third segment began, and the room fell into a strange quiet that didn't feel like television anymore. The cameras rolled, but the crew barely breathed. Evelyn Carter adjusted her blazer and forced a calm smile, yet her pulse thudded in her ears. Marcus Lane looked between the two women and sensed the change. The friendly talk show had turned into something heavier. He cleared his throat and said, Let's talk about the challenges of running large charities in today's world. Evelyn jumped in quickly, eager to regain control. The challenge, she said, is trust. People forget that behind every organization are humans doing their best. Her words sounded smooth, but her hands trembled slightly beneath the table. Renee Brooks waited until Evelyn finished, then leaned toward her microphone. Trust is earned, not inherited, she said quietly. And doing your best doesn't mean ignoring what doesn't add up. The audience shifted in their seats. The director whispered into his headset. Stay close on both faces. Evelyn's smile thinned. If you're implying something, Representative Brooks, please be clear. Renee didn't blink. I'm implying nothing. I'm asking for clarity. Marcus tried to lighten the tension with a joke, but the laughter from the crowd was nervous, uncertain. Renee opened a small folder in front of her, its pages marked with bright yellow notes. I have reviewed several of the Carter Trust's reports, she began. Some entries don't seem to match with public filings. The studio went still. Evelyn's throat tightened, but she kept her voice soft. Those reports are complex. Accounting often is. Of course, Renee said, but numbers should still agree with reality. A faint murmur spread through the audience. Marcus looked at the camera and then back at the women, sensing the moment spiraling beyond his control. Perhaps we should clarify off-air, he suggested. Renee shook her head. Transparency should never wait for commercial breaks. Her voice stayed calm, almost gentle, but the words hit like thunder. Evelyn laughed lightly, the practiced laugh of someone buying time. You make it sound like we're hiding something, she said. Are you? Renee asked. The crowd gasped. For a second, the only sound was the hum of the studio lights. Evelyn's smile faltered. That's a strong accusation. It's a simple question, Renee replied. Marcus glanced toward the control room, whispering, Do I cut? The answer came back firm. No, let it roll. Renee flipped another page. According to this record, your foundation reported a $20 million transfer to a health initiative overseas. Yet the initiative lists no staff, no office, and no public records of operation. Evelyn inhaled sharply. That project is managed through partners. Partners with no address? Renee asked softly. The crowd murmured again. Sometimes names are provisional, Evelyn said quickly. The forms can lag behind the work. Renee studied her, not unkindly, but with quiet certainty. I understand delays. What I don't understand is disappearance. Marcus interjected. Maybe we should... Renee raised her hand politely. Just one more point, Marcus. She turned another page and read aloud. A domestic grant for $2.3 million lists a recipient that closed its doors 3 years before the grant date. The host blinked. Is that accurate? Yes, Renee said. Public record. Evelyn swallowed hard. There are explanations for everything, she insisted. Then give them, Renee said. Now's the time. The words landed like a challenge. The audience sat frozen, some leaning forward, others whispering. Evelyn's face lost its color. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Marcus leaned toward the camera, his voice low and serious. Ladies and gentlemen, this conversation has taken an unexpected turn, but it speaks to the very heart of tonight's topic: truth and transparency. He tried to smile, but his expression trembled. Renee closed her folder and folded her hands. I believe in second chances, she said gently. But I also believe the public deserves answers. Evelyn exhaled slowly. You're twisting data to create drama. No, Renee said. I'm reading your reports word for word. The control room erupted with noise, producers shouting, assistants running, but the cameras kept rolling. Viewers at home could feel the tension through the screen. Evelyn tried again, her voice breaking slightly. Representative Brooks, you don't understand how much work goes into these programs. Then help us understand, Renee said. Help everyone watching. Silence followed, long and thick. Even the audience didn't know whether to clap or stay quiet. Marcus looked down at his notes, realizing they no longer mattered. This wasn't a talk show anymore. It was history unfolding live. Evelyn's fingers gripped the edge of the desk. Her practiced calm had slipped away. You're out of line, she whispered. No, Renee said softly. I'm exactly in line with the truth. The crowd erupted, half cheering, half gasping. Marcus's voice cracked as he said, We'll take a brief pause. But the director's voice cut through his earpiece. Don't cut. This is the story. Evelyn's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. She looked at the camera, then at Renee. You don't know the pressure of running something this big, she said. You don't know what it's like to be responsible for hope. Renee's tone softened. Hope doesn't need hiding places, Ms. Carter. It just needs honesty. The studio fell silent again. For the first time, Evelyn looked less like a polished leader and more like a person cornered by her own story. Marcus leaned back, speechless. The audience could feel it, the shift, the unraveling. Renee gathered her papers calmly, as if this had all been inevitable. Transparency, she said finally, means letting the light in, even when it burns. The camera zoomed in on her face, then on Evelyn's trembling hands. The red light above the lens blinked steadily. Millions watched in stunned quiet as the screen faded to the network logo. The feed cut a second later, but the silence that followed was louder than applause. Across the country, viewers sat frozen, realizing they had just witnessed something real, something raw, something that couldn't be rehearsed. And as the credits rolled, one thought echoed in every mind: this wasn't over. Dawn broke over the city with the quiet hum of traffic and news vans. By sunrise, every major network was replaying the clip from Voices of America Live. The same 30 seconds looped again and again. Representative Renee Brooks asking Evelyn Carter, "Are you hiding something?" And the silent moment that followed. Anchors spoke in hushed tones. Headlines flashed across screens. The night truth went live. In living rooms, diners, and coffee shops, people watched with disbelief. Some shook their heads, saying it was political theater. Others whispered that it felt like justice long overdue. In a quiet apartment high above the city, Evelyn Carter sat at her kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes, the glow of her phone lighting her tired face. Dozens of missed calls blinked on the screen. Lawyers, board members, her communications team. Her foundation's office phones rang non-stop. Messages from donors mixed with questions from reporters. The world she had carefully built now felt like a glass wall cracking from invisible pressure. She switched on the television and saw her own face freeze on the screen, mid-sentence, eyes wide. The caption read, "Evelyn Carter responds to allegations," but she hadn't responded yet. She hadn't even spoken. Across town, Renee Brooks walked through the halls of the Capitol, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Reporters swarmed around her, microphones raised. "Congresswoman, did you plan the confrontation? Do you have more evidence? Are you calling for an investigation?" Renee kept walking, calm and composed. "The facts will speak," she said softly and kept going. In her office, her assistant had already stacked printed news articles on her desk. Some praised her courage. Others accused her of ambush. But Renee didn't linger on them. She stared instead at the blue folder she had carried onto the show. Its edges were worn now, the pages covered with small notes. She knew this was just the beginning. Meanwhile, the Carter Trust headquarters looked like a fortress under siege. Security guards stood at the doors while staff whispered in hallways. The public relations team drafted statement after statement, deleting and rewriting with every new headline. By noon, the foundation released a short message. "We are reviewing our records to clarify inaccuracies mentioned during last night's broadcast." It did little to calm the storm. Donors began calling to freeze contributions. Social media feeds exploded with clips, memes, and endless debate. Talk radio hosts dissected every expression on Evelyn's face. "That pause told the whole story," one said. "You can't fake that kind of fear." In coffee shops, older viewers compared the moment to political scandals from decades earlier, saying it felt like history repeating itself. Younger viewers called it a lesson in accountability. By evening, the story had grown beyond television. Government agencies released short notices saying they would review the foundation's filings. The phrase "preliminary inquiry" filled the headlines. Evelyn's lawyer arrived at her apartment, urging her to stay silent until they had a plan. "This will pass," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. She nodded, though her mind felt foggy. For years she had stood on stages preaching integrity. Now she couldn't tell if the silence she kept was protection or confession. Outside her window, news helicopters circled like insects drawn to light. Across the city, Renee Brooks sat alone in her office as dusk settled over Washington. The noise outside was endless, phones ringing, reporters shouting, but inside the room was still. She replayed the broadcast once more, not out of pride, but reflection. Her words had come out measured and calm, but she felt the weight of them now. It wasn't triumph. It was responsibility. Her aide entered quietly. "They're calling you a hero," he said. Renee shook her head. "Heroes end stories? I just opened one." The aide hesitated. "Are you ready for what's coming?" "No one's ever ready for truth," she replied, closing the folder. In small towns and big cities alike, conversations carried her name and Evelyn's. People argued, speculated, took sides. But beneath the noise ran a quieter current, a new hunger for honesty, for proof that integrity still mattered. Late that night, Evelyn finally answered a call from her father. His voice, once booming with confidence, sounded older. "You have to tell the truth, Evie," he said gently. "Even if it hurts." She didn't reply. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at the blue glow of her television, still showing the replay. The red "Live" sign in the corner felt like it was carved into her heart. For the first time, she understood what Renee had meant about light burning when it touches hidden things. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, low and distant, like a warning. The truth had broken free, and nothing could stop it now. Somewhere in the dark, both women lay awake, each realizing that the next dawn would not bring peace but reckoning. The storm had only just begun, and the whole world was watching to see who would stand and who would fall. The night that started with bright lights had turned into a mirror none of them could escape, and its reflection was only growing sharper. The hearings began 2 weeks later, and the nation held its breath. The committee chamber in Washington buzzed with reporters, flashing cameras, and restless whispers. At the long wooden table sat Evelyn Carter, pale but composed, flanked by her lawyers. Across from her sat Representative Renee Brooks, calm, still, the same blue folder resting in front of her like a symbol everyone recognized. The chairman cleared his throat and called the room to order. "We are here to discuss irregularities in charitable records," he said, though everyone knew this was about far more than paperwork. Outside the building, crowds filled the streets, some carrying signs that read "Truth Matters," others holding banners of support for Evelyn, saying, "Mistakes aren't crimes." Inside, cameras broadcast every second live. Evelyn spoke first. Her voice was steady but low. She explained programs, partners, audits, and delays. She said she never meant to mislead anyone. "The work we do saves lives," she said softly. "I only wanted to keep it going." For a moment, her words drew sympathy, even from people who had turned against her. But when Renee Brooks began to speak, the tone of the room changed again. "Good intentions," she said, "must walk with good proof." She opened the folder, her fingers tracing the familiar notes. "These are the records we've verified. Transfers that can't be explained. Recipients that never existed. The truth is written here in plain numbers, and numbers don't lie." Evelyn looked down at the table. Her lawyers whispered, but she didn't hear them. She knew the figures were real. She had trusted people she shouldn't have. She had signed things she hadn't read closely. And now, under the lights of the hearing room, every careless signature had turned into a spotlight of its own. The chairman asked if she wished to make a statement. She hesitated, then spoke without notes. "I believed in our mission," she said. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking the right questions. That's my fault. I thought I was protecting hope, but I was protecting myself." The room went silent. Even Renee sat still, watching not an enemy but a human being facing the truth. "I accept responsibility," Evelyn finished, her voice trembling. "Whatever that means now." The chairman thanked her and adjourned the hearing for the day, but outside, the world was already reacting. News tickers flashed her confession. Commentators called it the most honest statement they'd heard from a public figure in years. Some called it courage. Others called it collapse. The Carter Trust Board resigned the next morning, handing operations to an independent panel. Donations, surprisingly, began to rise again, not in loyalty to Evelyn, but in loyalty to the idea that truth still mattered. Renee Brooks, meanwhile, became a reluctant symbol of accountability. She refused interviews, avoided talk shows, and returned quietly to her district office. When a reporter finally caught up with her outside the Capitol and asked, "Do you feel you destroyed a legacy?" she answered simply, "No. I reminded people that legacies are built on honesty, not silence." Her words played on every news channel that night. Weeks passed, then months. Investigations concluded, reforms were written, and new laws required greater transparency for every major charity in the country. The world moved forward, but something deeper had changed. People read donation reports more carefully. They asked harder questions. They trusted a little slower. One spring morning, Evelyn Carter visited a small community clinic funded by the Reorganized Foundation. The director greeted her kindly. "We kept the programs alive," he said. Evelyn smiled faintly. That's all that matters now. She signed the guest book and left quietly, unnoticed by most. Across town, Renee sat by her office window, reading a handwritten note that had arrived without a return address. It said, "You didn't just expose numbers. You reminded us that truth can still win." She folded the paper carefully and looked out at the Capitol dome glowing in the evening light. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a small smile. The storm had finally passed. History would remember the night truth went live, not as a scandal but as a turning point. Somewhere between reputation and reality, two women had proven that even in a world built on image, honesty could still find the microphone. The cameras were off now, the lights cooled, but the echo of that night remained, a quiet voice whispering through every newsroom, every office, every heart that watched. Truth doesn't need permission to speak. It only needs someone brave enough to let it. The cameras may have turned off that night, but the story never really ended. Across homes and cities, people kept talking. Some remembered Evelyn Carter as a woman who faced her mistakes with courage. Others remembered Renee Brooks as the voice that spoke when silence had grown too heavy. But what everyone remembered was that moment. The instant truth stepped into the light and refused to leave. It reminded millions that honesty can still exist in a world built on appearances, that courage still matters, and that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought with words. Long after the headlines faded, people carried the lesson with them. The truth might shake you, but it will also set you free. It might burn, but it always cleanses. And somewhere deep down, we all know that truth, once spoken, never dies. It keeps echoing, reminding us that light always finds a way through the cracks. So if this story moved you, if it made you think, or if you believe that truth should always have a voice, take a second to support the channel. Hit the like button. It helps more people find stories like this. Subscribe if you want more powerful tales about courage, choices, and the moments that change everything. And remember, every time you share a story that matters, you become part of the truth that refuses to stay quiet. Because in the end, light doesn't ask for permission. It just shines.